Let's look at another master game in the Nimzo-Indian, which begins d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and b4. So this game continued e3, b6, and knight e2. This is known as the Fischer variation, and I have an introductory video that covers this variation. I'll put a link in the description below. Black occupies the e4 square, puts further pressure on the knight on c3, stops the e4 pawn from advancing. Queen c2 to guard the knight and attack black's knight. Bishop b7 protects the knight on e4. a3 induces a trade. Bishop takes c3, check. Knight takes c3, knight takes c3, queen takes c3. So white was able to get the bishop pair in this variation without having his c-pawns doubled. But white does have some difficulty developing his kingside bishop. He has to watch out for the g2 square. Queen f6 is an interesting move in this position, and white responded with b3. If white had responded with a standard move, bishop to d3, sacrificing the g2 pawn, then the queen would already stand well placed to guard the g7 pawn. Okay, so that's the point. Another possible move here is f3, but that allows a standard move, queen to h4 check, and then g3, and then queen h5 attacks f3 for a second time. And the only way to save it is to play e4, so blocking the bishop and guarding the pawn laterally with the queen. But then f5 is strong, and there's a lot of pressure on these two pawns in white's position. Black is ready to castle and make use of the f-file. So black's doing well. Okay, so back to the game. White played b3. I'll point out another option is to play b4 in that position, a little more aggressive. And then d6. So black wants to develop the knight to the d7 square. He doesn't want to block his strong diagonal here. So bishop b2. So now we see the point of pushing the b pawn. It's to fianchetto the bishop. Castles. Queen to c2. So queen c2 maybe makes the move d5 possible with a discovery on the queen. We're also protecting the f2 pawn right here in case we want to castle long. So queen h6, an important move. This releases the black f pawn to push forward, but it also keeps an eye on the e3 pawn, so it stops white from pushing to f3. So white would like to push to f3 to blunt that bishop and get his bishop out. So nice positional move, and white castles long. Knight d7 continuing to develop. King to b1, it's safer, and that allows the pawn to be pushed on e3. It's no longer pinned. f5 stops that plan of pushing that e-pawn, and also the black knight would nestle in nicely on the f6 square behind the f-pawn. Okay, f3, further controlling e4 and trying to push to e4. Rook a e8. Notice that the e-pawn was actually hanging the last move, but black cannot take it because his queen would be trapped after bishop to c1. So black played rook a e8, and then bishop c1, queen f6, getting off of that diagonal with the bishop, bishop e2, a5, and e4. So e4 is an inaccuracy because it allows the position to be opened up on the king's side to black's favor. Let's see what happens. F takes e4, f takes e4, queen g6 eyeing the e4 pawn. It's under attack twice. So bishop f3 guards it. Knight f6 attacks it for a third time. So black gets a bit of an initiative. Rook he1 to defend it, and e5 to fix that pawn. d5 blocks out the bishop on b7, but it redeploys to a better diagonal. Okay, bishop to e3, bishop g4, and now white has the choice of either exchanging bishops or allowing black to saddle him with a weak f3 pawn that can be attacked. So white takes the bishop, queen takes bishop, and now the e4 pawn is under attack by the knight and queen, so white defends it with bishop g1. So the rook on e1 now defends the pawn. Rook f7, rook e3, rook ef8, so black doubles rooks on the only open file on the board. Rook de1, so white is overprotecting the e4 pawn. Knight h5, nice square for the knight would be on f4. Queen e2 offering a trade of queens. Black doesn't go for that. He's still pressing, attacking. g3 guards the f4 square. Knight retreats back to f6, and now white makes a mistake. Queen to c3 allows a nice, or rather rook to c3 allows a nice tactic. Okay, perhaps a better move is h3, and in that case black had planned h5, and then the knight can go to h7 and then to the nice g5 square. But after rook c3, black has the nice tactic, knight takes e4. Queen takes knight, queen takes queen check, rook takes queen, and rook to f1 check, and we can see the point of the sacrifice on the e4 square. The bishop on g1 is loose. The rook guards it and guards the bishop, guards the king and the bishop, but we exchange rooks, and the other rook comes down to f1 with check. King c2, the bishop is picked off. Rook e2 to guard the second rank, guard the h2 pawn. Getting the rook back to the open file. b4 trying to expand the queenside pawns. White is now down a pawn, notice. A takes b4, a takes b4. Now rook to f3 is a nice positional move. It's simply designed to keep the white king from advancing any further. c5, b takes c5, b takes c5. Rook to a3 with the intent of rook to a2 to trade off rooks. King and pawn ending would be 1 for black. So rook to e1 stops the trade of rooks. Rook to a5 to attack the pawn. Pawns get traded. Rook to d1 to guard the d pawn. And now black could have won a pawn with rook to a2 check, picking up the h2 pawn and going up 2 pawns. But perhaps even stronger and definitely simpler is rook to c5 check. And white resigned. And the point is the white king has to step over to the b file, and this rook will maintain its position on the c file, and the king is cut off from all action in the position. So black is simply playing a king up in the position. All right, I hope you enjoyed this game, and I learned a little bit more about the Nimzo-Indian. Thanks for watching.